to my parents. And it happened to be an evening in Washington, D.C. It was a special ceremony that the Life Mathematics Trust was awarding Dad with his 50th, not 50th, sorry, with a Lifetime Achievement Award. And it was in the form of a medallion. And they called him up and they presented him with this medallion, put it around his neck. Almost instantly, I don't think he even spoke, he called my mother up on stage, took the medallion off and put it around her neck and gave her credit for his entire career. And as the muse, the driving force, the reason for which he did everything, and the person who continually encouraged and inspired him. And many of you know the story. I'll backtrack just a little bit. One day when I was about 8 years old, I had a toy typewriter, but it worked, but the way it worked was you had to move the ball to each individual letter and then hit the button and then move the ball. So I spent about an hour getting one paragraph, right? And I made a mistake on the last line or the last word. And I was so upset that I had wasted an hour of my life and it didn't turn out, and I was crying and upset. My father was up in the office working and he came down to see what was wrong, and I told him, Dad, I just wasted a whole hour doing this and I wrecked it. And he told me the story of how, well, I once spent an entire year working on my PhD thesis, and at the end of the year, Columbia rejected it and told me to start all over. I don't know how many of you know that, but his response to that news, graciously, was to quit the program and become a Coca-Cola, a assembly line physical lifter at the Coca-Cola bottling plant. One thing about Dad is he was never a lifter. He was not an athletic type. And he came home every day sore, complaining, muscles hurting. And my mother had not bargained for this. She was engaged to hopefully marry a PhD in math, not a Coca-Cola bottling plant lifter of boxes. And she gave him an ultimatum: either you go back to school and complete your degree, or I quit this relationship. And it was a no-brainer, and the rest is history. And that's why it was 50 years later that she got the medallion around her neck. And I'm thinking that I will hang this plaque in her room at home. She remains in our home where she lived with my dad for, they would have been married 70 years in another month, another 3 weeks, December 29th. They would have had their 70th anniversary. So, and he devoted, until he fell 3 years ago and suffered a brain injury, the prior 13 years of his life, he stopped everything to care for her full time at home, to keep her at home. And she's still at home, and this plaque will not go on his wall with the other ones. I'm going to put it in her room, opposite her bed. Now, I had the privilege, you guys knew Dr. Maletsky and Dr. Sobel as your college teachers. I had Dr. Maletsky for 8th grade, and the unique privilege of having my own father for 9th grade algebra. And as a teenager, that's good news and bad news, right? You cringe if you think your father's going to embarrass you. The amazing thing is he never embarrassed me. He made me proud, even though I hid in the back row and pretended I didn't know him. But I looked around and watched all the students just be entranced by him. And Dr. Maletsky got the firecracker story a little bit wrong. Dad didn't light the firecracker. Dad spent the whole that whole one class, filling the board with the quadratic formula. And when he got to the very end, and to the punchline, whatever that was, I don't remember it. I do remember this. he wrote down the word Eureka, and at that moment he had his colleague Bill Walsh sneak into the back of the room, and he lit the firecracker in a tin pail, and it came from behind us, and we all jumped out of our seats. And at least for a number of years we didn't forget the quadratic formula. But through lack of use, you tend to forget. One thing I remember Dad doing this was his math warm-up for 9th graders, and the difference between he and I is he did this spontaneously in his head, in the moment, twice as fast as I'm about to do it, and I'm reading it because I had to prepare it. But he just made this up to get our wits about us. So you math heads, get your math heads together. This is how Dad would start the class to get us on our toes. These are calculations, just to give you at least a heads up. You ready? 3 times 7 plus 1 divided by 2 plus 1, 3 times 7 plus 1 divided by 2 plus 1 divided by 2 plus 1 times 3 minus 3 divided by 3 plus 3 times 2 minus 7 minus 3 plus 6 minus 2 times 4 plus 1 divided by 7 plus 5 minus 4 times 7 plus 4 divided by 10 plus 1 plus 8 divided by 5 minus 3 equals?
257.
0.
You guys are bad, because in high school a few of us would usually get it, and he was doing this in his head really quick. I'll do it a little slower, give you one more shot. 3 times 7 plus 1 divided by 2 plus 1 divided by 2 plus 1 times 3 minus 3 divided by 3 plus 3 times 2 minus 7 minus 3 plus 6 minus 2 times 4 plus 1 divided by 7 plus 5 minus 4 times 7 plus 4 divided by 10 plus 1 plus 8 divided by 5 minus 3 equals?
3.
0. You can check
I
my
said it was
math.
0 1.
So that's how he would get us on our,
I said it was
on our
0
toes
or
as
1.
soon as he walked in the classroom, often. One of the most amazing things about his passing was we had a gathering at our house for people to come pay their respects for the next 2 days, and person after person that I had never met before, some of you are in this room, showed up and introduced themselves by saying to me, "Your father changed my life forever." And after a while, it's like, really? Really? It included a little old lady with a walker who came in and said she had studied with Dad in 1954, which is 62 years ago. And she showed up at our house to let me know that. And I wasn't all that surprised to be hearing it, because the truth is, every year that I've known Dad, he would receive at least half a dozen first snail mail letters in those days, and later would become emails, out of the blue, randomly, spontaneously, from students he had had 40, 50, and like this lady 60 years ago, who would just feel motivated to suddenly write him and tell him that he had, in fact, changed their life forever. This was happening all the time to him. So like I started, he was plenty acknowledged during his lifetime. He had to know the difference he had made on all of your lives, and thousands, and someone told me millions of people, which is hard for me to grasp, but I guess it increases exponentially if you go by the students he had and the students they had, and their students. It grows pretty quickly. You know the rice on the checkerboard story, right? So the other thing I realized coming here is I brought the eulogy that I delivered at the funeral, and as I didn't really prepare much for tonight. If you jotted down a few things, but I realized you can only write and you can only deliver one eulogy for your father. So some of you are there, most of you aren't. Sorry. But I can pick out a few things that I did think were relevant tonight. I said I had him as my Algebra 1 teacher. What I didn't say is it was a double whammy in that we used his textbook, the Bank, Sobel, Walsh Algebra 1 books, And then it was a triple whammy because in those textbooks there were verbal problems like, if Elliot is heading west at 75 miles per hour, and Harry, my brother, is leaving on a train headed east at 7 a.m. going 60 miles per hour, and so forth. And he would always include, if you look through those verbal problems, members of our family, until political correctness and racial diversity insisted that he change the Johns to Juans and the Marys to Marias in the new editions. But in those days, I was what you call a serial monogamist, so I had a new girlfriend every 2 years. So for every new edition of each book, there was the same problem, but with a new girl. 1 year it was Karen, mowing the lawn, and then it was Sharon, and then it was Jan, then it was Fran. And then I finally met my wife late. We met when I was 44, 20 years ago. And it was just at the time that Dad had retired from writing textbooks, of which, by the way, he wrote over 60, and they were translated into multiple languages, including Chinese, Japanese, Indonesian, and Spanish, that I know offhand. We have them on our shelf. So Shari didn't make the cut. He had just retired. She never made it into a problem. And then it was like a miracle. At the last minute, one of his publishers begged him to do one final edition of one of his books. So at just under the wire, Shari slid in, made it into a problem. And as far as I can remember, her train was going 80 miles an hour, heading north. I just wanted to read two little letters I got, two notes I got after he passed. One was from a college high student, which was the campus demonstration school where I had Dr. Miletsky and Dr. Sobel. So this was a student of his from 50 years ago, 1966. He wrote me, "Your dad was truly one of the most important and influential people in my life, whose example inspired me to pursue the career I did and become the man I am." And then I got another letter from a college friend who wrote, "The number of students who came to see math as something much more than a four-letter word because of Max Sobel is legion. Max enriched math from the inside out, letting us teachers show students that it's the math itself that is dazzling. In an electronic world, there's nothing like this. No flashing lights or dazzling marvels in any of Max's offerings. He showed us that the excitement comes from the math itself. As teachers and lovers of math, we knew that, but Max showed us how to impart that to others. Maybe the best epitaph for Max Sobel is what I overheard one boy tell a new student as he came to my class for the first time. 'This is math. I used to try to get kicked out. Now it's the best part of the day. I wish they let us stay here all day long.'"
Wow.
So I guess that's it. I just want to mention that Janice was being a little bit shy or humble in that, in addition to their professional connection as student-teacher, for the last 10 years of Dad's life, she showed up at the house every single day for 2 hours or more to take him out and go for walks in the park or the mall, or if he couldn't go out, to sit with him, and at the very end to feed him. She became his best friend, and I think that should be mentioned. And thank you, Dr. Miletsky, for that wonderful reminiscence. I'll treasure that. I can't wait to see it on videotape and show it to my brother and other members of the family. Thank you, Christy, for this amazing night. All of you who spoke, Miriam and Stephanie. And did I miss anybody? Okay. Thanks so much. Thank you, Dad.